Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. This is a great BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan last year in which we celebrate Westerns. Western novels, Western short stories, tremendous fun. Old-fashioned fun, anachronistic fun now because Westerns are gone. They're a niche publication market once, and once upon a time they weren't. If you'd gone back 60 years to a bookstore or bookseller of some kind and said, and called Westerns a niche publication, they'd have said, our monthly sheet depends on it, so it's not niche, it's big. And as a result of it having that kind of a heyday, there are millions of Westerns out there, just billions. I made a point once June on the Range ended last year, and I saw how popular it was. I loved it, but it wasn't just me. Everybody loved it. Once I saw that and I just hoped that it would be back this year and that we'd all be in one piece to celebrate it. I would automatically collect old Western paperbacks when I saw them. And so I had a stack of them. I have a stack of them to go through. I'm thinking I'm going to start shifting to ebooks, but I grabbed another paperback for last night's reading. I grabbed this thing, Giles Lutz's book, The Bleeding Land, which only barely survived. The cover only barely stayed on, or I'd have another book to bury, just like I did the night before last, because these things were not made to last. This came out in, 1964? 1965 for 50 cents. Very cheaply made. This was not designed to be here in 2023. And I would argue that probably most of the people who picked this off a spinner rack at a dry goods store or a bookstore in 1965 are dead now. And here it is. Somebody made an attempt to tape the cover on. So when I found it, I think this was free, I grabbed it. And I read it last night. And I have mixed feelings about it. When I saw the title, The Bleeding Land, it never occurred to me that this would be firmly set in history. It never occurred to me, in other words, to link this with so-called Bleeding Kansas, which I'm going a tiny bit historical here. We're talking about 1854. We're talking about the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which was part of a forestalling motion in the U.S. Congress. It was the roiling debate of the day, which is, as the country expands and more territories are being inducted as states, are they going to be free or slave? Because the slave-owning powers, the South, they want to expand the slave-owning base. Otherwise, they know perfectly well that they're headed for being a tiny minority in Congress. And the North is largely fueled by abolitionist fervor. It's not just a question of maintaining control of both houses of Congress. They don't want slavery to exist at all in the land, much less for it to increase by going into the territories of Kansas or Nebraska or wherever. They don't want it to increase. And I guess maybe with bleeding in the title, I should have remembered that, but I should have maybe expected that, but that's what this is. Very much that's what this is. That is at the heart of this book. This is one of the most historically contextualized Westerns that I have read yet. Ordinarily, the Westerns that I read, maybe a tiny bit of history will be very tangentially introduced. Maybe somebody will meet a famous gunslinger, or the hanging judge will be marginally connected with something, but it won't be anything other than that. Most of the Westerns that I've read are basically adventure stories that don't want you to have to feel like you should know history. But this is set firmly in the midst of that. The main character of this book is Eli Dryden, who is, rough and ready and two-fisted, to the point where you often are in this book are tempted to forget a detail that we're told about him fairly early on, which is that he's only 22. But he's extremely stubborn, and he wants to make a life for himself. He wants to create a life in the territories, stake out some land, work it. He has no evil intent at all. And right at the beginning of this book, he is trapped in a barroom brawl. He's minding his own business. He's not giving any lip to anybody, but we're going to see there are partisan forces at work, and there's no way to be neutral. And suddenly he finds himself facing 5 men. And he hefts a chair up because he's going to fight. He's going to do his best to fight them. Although he estimates the odds, and he estimates them correctly, that in this crowded room, with them between me and the door, I might take out 1, I might take out 2. If I'm very lucky, I'll take out 3. But I won't take out all 5. I can't win. And he's about to try anyway when a steely voice is heard from the doorway. An older man uh, is named Lane. He's at the door with a gun trained on all of those thugs that are menacing Eli Dryden. And Lane tells him, "Don't take another step." And even then, Eli says, "Well, the gun that he has in his hand can't kill all of them. So if they rushed all at once, they would win. But of course, that's not the way it works, so they don't. Instead, they throw their guns across the room, and our two heroes beat a quick retreat. And Lane brings Eli out of town to his camp out of town, and they start to talk. And Lane explains to Eli what the partisan furor is here, and it is slavery. It is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This is 1854, or I don't know if the date is ever specifically said in here, but we must be coming right up on it. Because the tensions all over the territories are all about slavery, and the sides are well drawn and violent. And Lane is very nice. He's a gentleman. He's very well spoken. Eli notices right away that this guy has incredible charisma as well as a great way with words. He would be able to command men. And Eli feels himself beholden to him. Who knows how bad that bar fight would have gone. So he feels like he owes him one. And Lane also teaches him a lot more things in the course of their initial association. He teaches him a lot more things about the lay of the land, the nature of the territory. And Eli is very grateful. But he wants to start a claim of his own. He wants to be a landowner of his own. He's thinking, he tells Lane, I'm not in favor of slavery, but I'm also not in favor of telling anyone what to do. I'm not an activist. I don't want to take sides. And Lane tells him what is certainly going to become true in the course of this book, which is that that's not possible. They'll make you take sides. You can't be neutral. You can get out of the territory, but if you're in the territory, you can't be neutral. And gradually that turns out to be true. Eli starts to become a figure in the local exponent of Bleeding Kansas. He starts to become a major figure in fighting against the partisan warfare that is going to ruin people because they won't take sides on the slavery debate. He starts to become a bigger man than either we think at the beginning of the book he will ever be, or than Lane thinks he will ever be. And, of course, he attracts the ladies. He's fairly good looking. And one of them fancies him, and he fancies her. And we get a scene. I'll read it to you. It gives you an idea of what the prose is like here. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see. It is. Well, here. Let me go to. Sorry, I'm bouncing around here for. Eli becomes deeply connected with the men on either side of this issue, and a lot of those men are historical figures. They are. There's a famous ex-senator named Aldrich who really wants to push the question. There are historical characters all through this that start to meet him and start to give this thing a deeper. Sorry, I'm going to continue to look here for what I'm talking about, but I can palaver to you while I do it. They start to give the book a deeper historical resonance than I was expecting at all, which is, I don't know quite how I feel about it, because the writing in here is not all that good. It's kind of labored. I was kind of hoping that I had marked the place where I could show you that, but I don't appear to have done that. I thought it was page 38. No? Well, anyway, we are introduced to the subject by Lane. Lane tells Lane tells Eli all about the subject and how you're going to have to you're going to have to take a side, especially if you want to be somebody, if you want to be a figure here. I think I'm close to. The spot where I wanted to be. Yes, here we go. This is a conversation between Eli and his lady love, Lacey, which will give you an idea of a phenomenon that we've seen in other westerns in June on the Range, which is that the writers who can do the two-fisted action and the he-manly stuff they just cannot do relations between men and women. They just can't do it. Whether it's that they are school kid awkward or they think the readers are, I don't really know. But we get Lacey is telling Eli that he's so caught up in the factional causes of the county, that he has lost track of himself. That he's not the person she fell in love with. He's not the person that she originally knew. She tells him, "You've forgotten a lot of things, Eli. You've even forgotten what you came to Kansas for." His eyes grew cold. "We built once, and it was taken away from us. I'm only making sure it won't happen again." Is that the way you justify it, Eli? He didn't have to justify anything to her, he said. It's none of your concern. They were in front of her house, and he would be glad to get away from her. Her eyes misted with tears. None of my concern, she cried. When I worry every minute what's happening to you, when I torture myself by thinking you might not come back? He stared into her eyes, seeing the longing and the need in them. A queer trembling started inside him, and he said hoarsely, "Lacey, are you saying..." She said simply, "I've loved you since the moment Cass brought you home." A man stumbled over answers right before his eyes. He said, "Lacey," and opened his arms. She came into them with a little sigh. It was the first time he had kissed her. He felt the quivering of her mouth under his. Her lips were young and inexperienced. Then the quivering was gone, replaced by a demand. A woman was like a flower. It took the touch of the right man to make her blossom. That kind of thing kind of ruins the personal element of this. And much as I like the history elements involved, I can read about, Bleeding Kansas in history, in real books. I don't have to read a made-up story about it. I'm sure there are a million novels about it. But it's far more interesting in nonfiction than anyone could ever make it in fiction, especially if you're going to the bother of telling me some guy's sod-busting story in addition to that. If you're going to do that, I want you to hang it on real characters. And Eli Dryden is not a real character. Lane is the most real character in this book. And of course, they're going to have, inevitably, the two of them are going to have a confrontation at the end of the book. And one of the nice things about that confrontation here, that I don't know anything about Giles Lutz. I'm assuming, just given the givens from June on the Range 2023, I'm assuming that Giles Lutz is a pseudonym, that the guy worked in pulps, and that he wrote under 5 or 6 pseudonyms, probably 300 or 400 books. That's what I'm assuming. Unless I know otherwise about the author, I'm just going to assume that, because everyone that I dig into is like that. But I really kind of wished that he had given me Lane's story. Lane is the one who's dealing directly with all the historical figures, the political figures in Kansas and Nebraska, the wheelers and dealers, the mob leaders, the people who were a part of history. They were a part of this 1854 act, and the huge amount of controversy and vigilantism that sprang up on both sides of it. He's a bombastic character, yes, and he's larger than life and seems a little bit seedy, a little bit treacherous, but there's no bar to a character like that being the main character of a book. He's far more interesting than Eli Dryden. The one thing I like that Giles Lutz does is when they have their inevitable confrontation, it's not a boy versus a man where the boy just happens to win because he has right on his side. That's never really very convincing. You're either a better planner and a faster draw, or you're not. Right doesn't change things. But this author doesn't do that. Instead, the confrontation at the end between Lane and Eli is a measure of how much Eli has grown. So we do get real growth of a character here, and the 22-year-old, slightly idealistic, slightly callow, that we get at the beginning of the book is not anything like the character that we get at the end. He has grown. As you saw from that one hint of that passage with Lacey, part of his growing goes in the wrong direction. He starts to become coarse and a little bit unthinking, and has to be brought back to the good side of his nature in the climax of the book, which involves Lane. So that part was well done. Even the frictions between Lane and Eli right away, once they leave Lane's camp and go to the nearest town, when they ride into town and they meet an old friend of Lane's who is part of this whole slavery question, in front of his friend, Lane, not meaning to make a point or anything, but just lapsing into what we suspected is his natural character, starts to order Eli around. Stable your horse here, go over there, get this sort of thing. And Eli doesn't like it. Right from the beginning, he doesn't like it. He didn't come all this way, out into the new territories, in order to be the creature of someone else. He came specifically to make his own land, at the behest of his very stubborn grandfather, namesake Eli. So that is kind of good, and that kind of stubbornness, that kind of contrarianness, leads Eli into some personality drawbacks in the course of the book that have to be corrected. So I guess if you're a reader of this thing, you're thinking, maybe original readers of this thing were pulling for Eli, or were drawn into the book. I wish Eli had more of what we in the 21st century refer to as interiority. I wish he weren't so much of a Western cutout figure, but he mostly is in this book. Lane is not, but he is. But anyway, that was my book for today, The Bleeding Land. I really don't think this thing would survive another reading. Certainly, I think the cover would come off. Which, kind of tempts me again to move on to ebooks, which are invulnerable. Maybe I'll do that tonight. I'm for Book Trek, another BookTube event. I am basically just reading ebooks. I only have a handful of Star Trek novels in paper. So maybe for the rest of June I'll just do that. I mean, the paperback westerns that I have aren't going anywhere. They'll be around for June on the Range next year, and I could, Heresy of Heresies, read them without June on the Range. Just read them because they're here. That's what I tend to do with all of my books. I don't know. I'm not intensively planning my performance in any BookTube event this month, and that's making them all the more enjoyable to me. So maybe I'll just keep doing that. Maybe I'll see what I want to do for a mariachi band passing by. I'll see what I want to do tonight. I don't know. So it'll either be one of these ratty old paperbacks just to give them their last read before they go up to Boot Hill, or it'll be an ebook. I have a million westerns as ebooks, so it might be time to start breaking out some of those. But anyway, The Bleeding Land, I strongly urge you to read some nonfiction about the long slavery fight in American history in the 1850s. Especially if you're an American and you think that the slavery conflict started with the Civil War, it didn't. There were all sorts of very violent, very headline-grabbing fights about how to expand the United States. We're expanding westward. We're expanding south. Are they going to be free states or slave states? With very real consequences for representative government back in Washington. It's a fascinating story, full of larger-than-life characters. Once you dip your toe into a really good history of that time period, you're going to wonder why you worried about Eli, why you were even reading about him in the first place. Unless he's going to be a better gunfighter, a more rootin' character, unless he's going to be a little bit larger than life himself. Anyway, that was my Western for today. It wasn't all that much to write home about, so we'll see if tomorrow's is any better, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.